There is something about winter that makes us forget who we are. Not the gentle winter of warm lights and snowmen, but the kind that bites through wool and leather, the kind that turns breath into ice and fingers into stone. In the winter of 1944, at a small Belgian crossroads near the town of Malmedy, American soldiers learned something terrible about this kind of cold. They learned that winter does not just freeze the body, it freezes mercy. The Ardennes forest in December is a place of silence. Tall trees stand beneath a grey sky and snow absorbs every sound. It feels almost sacred. But in 1944, this quiet place became the setting for Germany's final gamble, a massive surprise attack meant to break the Allied lines and force a political collapse before the war could end. Speed was everything, and anything that slowed the advance was considered a threat. The prisoners were gathered in an open field surrounded by snow and silence. They had done what soldiers are trained to do when resistance no longer makes sense. They lowered their weapons, they raised their hands. In war, that gesture is supposed to mean something. It is a quiet agreement between enemies that survival still matters. The men stood close together. Some were wounded, some were shaking from the cold, some were thinking about home. They had no reason to believe this moment would end differently. No warning, no signal, no time to prepare. And then something broke. No one knows exactly how it began. An order, a misunderstanding, a single gunshot. What is known is that the silence did not last. Machine guns opened fire at close range into a group of unarmed men. Those who fell into the snow. Those who ran were hunted down, and those who survived the first moments learned quickly that pretending to be dead was the only remaining option. The field became still again, but it was no longer quiet. Not everyone in the field died that afternoon. A handful of men survived, not because they were spared, but because they learned quickly that stillness could be mistaken for death. They lay in the snow among bodies that would not move again, holding their breath, ignoring pain, waiting for the sound of engines to fade. Hours later, when the cold became unbearable, they stood up and began to walk. Some collapsed before reaching safety. Some were found by Allied patrols, and some carried what they had seen for the rest of their lives. The field was quiet again, but nothing about it was empty. News of the massacre spread quickly, moving faster than the German advance among American units. Anger replaced restraint, and fear rewrote old rules. Some soldiers stopped taking prisoners, especially when the enemy wore black uniforms, especially when they remembered the field and what had happened there. Violence has a way of multiplying. One broken rule invites another until cruelty feels justified and mercy feels dangerous. After the war, trials were held, sentences were passed and time moved on, but history did not forget. The crossroads near Malmedy is quiet now. Snow still falls there in winter, covering the ground, softening the edges. But beneath that silence lies a question that has never faded. When obedience collides with conscience and fear demands action, how certain are we that we would have chosen differently? By the time the first shots were fired, the moment for hesitation was already gone. What followed was not chaos but certainty. A certainty shaped by fear, exhaustion, and the belief that survival demanded decisiveness. In the Ardennes, the war had stripped everything down to its rawest logic. Act first or become a victim. The men standing in the snow were no longer seen as individuals. They became a risk, a future threat, an unknown that could not be allowed to persist. And once that shift occurs, mercy does not vanish dramatically. It disappears quietly, replaced by procedure, obedience, and the comfort of believing that someone else made the decision long before you did. History often asks how such moments are possible. But the more uncomfortable question is how often we convince ourselves that crossing a line is necessary, not because it is right, but because it feels inevitable. The snow did not hide what had happened for long. In the hours that followed, survivors began to move. Some crawled, some ran, some simply waited until nightfall, unsure if staying still was safer than trying to escape. When American forces returned to the area, they did not find a battlefield. They found bodies scattered across a frozen field. There were no signs of a prolonged fight. No defensive positions, no evidence of resistance. What investigators saw instead were patterns, groupings of men, clusters of wounds, and the unmistakable indication that many had been shot at close range. These were not deaths caused by confusion. They were decisions. Word of the massacre spread quickly through the American lines. Anger followed, then resolve. Orders were still orders, rules were still rules, but something had shifted. From that moment on, every encounter with the enemy carried the weight of Malmedy, and the understanding that restraint now felt like a risk few were willing to take. When the war ended, the questions did not. What happened at Malmedy could not be dismissed as the fog of battle or the confusion of combat. Investigations followed, testimony was gathered, names were recorded. For the first time, the violence of that winter afternoon was examined not as strategy but as choice. The trials that followed attempted to draw lines where none had been clear in the moment. Orders were weighed against conscience, obedience against responsibility. Some argued that survival left no room for hesitation. Others insisted that surrender had already drawn the line. The courtrooms were quieter than the battlefield, but the stakes were just as human. In the end, Malmedy was no longer only a place. It became a warning, a reminder that the most dangerous moments are not always the loudest ones, and that history is shaped not only by what we are ordered to do, but by what we decide we can live with afterward. The gunfire stopped, the snow kept falling, and in the Ardennes, silence returned long before understanding did. What had happened in that field did not announce itself to the world. It simply settled into the ground, absorbed by the winter, waiting to be discovered. There were no cameras in that field, no witnesses meant to remember what had happened there. Only bodies in the snow and men who walked away believing the moment had passed. For them, the danger felt over. For history, it had only just begun. In the days that followed, the question was not only what had happened near Malmedy, it was whether war itself had crossed a line it could never return from. When fear becomes absolute, when mercy feels dangerous, the rules that once seemed unbreakable begin to feel optional. This was not the trial, this was not justice. This was the moment before the world decided whether those things still mattered. And when the fighting ended, the question was no longer what they had done, but whether we would do the same.